Comics, the not quite final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enter for No Prize. Its continuing mission, to seek out good comics and new exciting storylines. To boldly go where no comic reviewer has gone before. And that's 2 out of 3 pillars of science fiction that I've referenced in this retrospective. Who will be the third? Who, indeed? Captain's Log, Supplemental. Welcome to the early 1990s. The last Angry Geek dropped me off at a time when I had just started to really get into comics. My job here in 1991 was to make sure that this comic, X-Men #1, become the great success it will one day be. How was I supposed to do that? I asked Geek. What could one comic reviewer do to preserve the future where X-Men #1 became the best-selling comic book of all time? The comic, by the way, sold millions of copies and earned a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for most comics ever sold. At that point, Brian patted me on the shoulder, smiled, and ran off saying, "Chris, I know you'll do a great job. Keep the faith. Geek away!" Sometimes I wonder about him. X-Men #1 was written by famed X-Men writer Chris Claremont and drawn by Jim Lee, though you wouldn't notice it given the fact that the characters here are suffering from Liefeld's disease, a disease that afflicted many X-Men books at the time and caused the characters to have pupil-less, squinty eyes, bizarre proportion, and gritting teeth. To be fair, it isn't that bad here. We're only seeing the warning signs. Meanwhile, in X-Force #1, the disease is in full force. Since I'm visiting 1991 right now, I wonder if I could eliminate the disease at the source. You could all thank me later. This comic's origin is sort of interesting. Basically, it was a byproduct of many things happening at once over at the House of Ideas. Jim Lee was already working on Uncanny X-Men as a regular artist and gave us memorable characters such as Gambit. Claremont was still chugging away at the writer's desk, and word from on high said that the fans loved the two's collaborative efforts on the 1990 crossover event, Extinction Agenda. The impact of this event is even touched on in the comic. I'll definitely get into that later. The original X-Men were also brought back into the fold after having been in a book called X-Factor, so the need for a companion book arose since there were frankly too many mutants for the writers to play with. To reward them for their successful crossover event, Lee and Claremont were given a whole new #1 issue to capitalize on what has become a hot property. It was also helped by the fact that this book had many covers that formed a very, very cool poster. I'm not kidding, look at it. The characters looked very dynamic in their poses. Very heroic. Very cool. Just look at how the team converges on Magneto. It's simply breathtaking and catches your eye. And yes, I was one of those kids that bought most of those covers. What, was I that obvious? I assure you that what's inside the cover is worth drooling over. Let's dig into X-Men #1 and find out just why it did so well. Our story begins in space, the final frontier. See, that Star Trek The Next Generation reference didn't go to waste, now did it? Anyway, we're in high orbit over Earth, where a few ships are engaged in a space battle. NASA astronomers must be loving this right now. It seems that a group of yellow-suited astronauts are trying to get to asteroid M, the current home of Magneto, the mutant master of magnetism. The fun and games are suddenly stopped by a blinding flash of light. The next 2 pages gives us a nice spread where Magneto hovers in the vacuum of space and ends the fight by stating he is losing interest in whatever happens on the planet below. But heaven help you if you bring the fight to his doorstep. You guys get all that? I know sound doesn't really travel in space, but I spent like an hour working on this decree, and I just wanted to make sure it all went through okay. Eric turns to leave when our friends in the yellow spacesuits wonder if he's going to leave them there to die. Magneto says he won't. He will simply return them all to the surface. The lady says she doesn't want to go because it is him that they came to find. Oh god, Magneto fanboys. Run, Eric. It turns out that the lady and the rest of her yellow-clad friends are all mutants who want to pledge their lives to Magneto and his cause. Eric responds by saying that those days are over. He mellowed out and wants to settle down. In response, the lady cries out that his people need him now more than ever. How can you deny your destiny? Lady, I'm an on-again, off-again supervillain. I hardly need your approval. Back on Earth, officials in Russia discussed how to best deal with Magneto, since Asteroid M is currently above their nation, and since both US and Russian shuttles were destroyed. The US get word that the Russians want to retaliate by any means necessary, and Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., believes that they could make things worse. He has an alternate solution. The scene shifts to a large, venerable mansion known to the world as Professor Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, where mutants are taught to protect a world that fears and hates them. Far below the school, the X-Men appear to be undergoing a training exercise, as Beast says the teams are ready for action. Storm declares that the object of this mission is to breach the defenses and reach Professor X. Speaking of the Professor, he and Jean Grey, who was one of his first students, are in a secluded spot where they talk about how much has changed since he was a teenager dodging death traps he set up in the original Danger Room. Good times. No, they're actually discussing how much has changed, and that despite all that, it feels as though the X-Men are coming together for the first time. This exercise is to show that they all mesh together as a team, and decide where the team would go from there. Mutantkind and humanity are still at each other's throats. Some of his students had died, and he wonders if he never left, where they would be now. Jean reassures him that he did what he thought was best, and now is the time to pick up the pieces and show the world that Charles' dream still holds validity. That was deep, Charles. Okay, who wants to see stuff explode? Rogue and Iceman dodge incendiary missiles that make short work of his ice slide, and the sudden Belle manages to get them on her tail. She figures that she should fly faster than them until they run out of fuel. The plan works, and enter Colossus and Archangel. Pete says that he will do what must be done. Does that include making out with alien ladies like he did in the 80s? Colossus tries to get the drop on Jean and the Prof when suddenly he gets a telepathic attack, which I imagine is like 10,000 times worse than an ice cream headache. Meanwhile, Psylocke, Gambit, and Wolverine are deep in the underbelly fighting robots, and eventually Gambit breaches the defenses to the point where he comes face to face with Jean. With all the charm and grace of a bull in a china shop, Gambit throws the kinetic energy charged card at the redhead, declares the tournament over, and then plants one on her. After that, Jean just kind of explodes. Dude's gotta think with his head and not the other parts of his anatomy, if you catch my drift. In response, Scott and Jean banter a bit about the Cajun in an exchange I find pretty funny, considering he's kind of ignoring the professor's telepathic calls. The Prof tries to get everyone on task, even though Cyclops develops a dry sense of humor, when out of a console comes Wolverine's clawed hand. The rest of him comes out, and he's basically going, "Grr, grr, Sabretooth, grr, Japan, grr, grr, adamantium." You know, typical Wolverine dialogue. Actually, he says the exercise is over, and points his claws at the Prof. This puts Cyclops back in Boy Scout mode, and he says, one slip just now could have killed him. Wolvie then says, "I don't slip, bub." Good night, everybody. The training session concludes, and everyone marvels at the holodeck-style danger room the team now has thanks to Charles' alien connections. It turns out that the X-Men have been training for days as the stakes are higher. Wolverine then grunts and tells Psyche he has better things to do than combat drills. Later, the team is briefed by S.H.I.E.L.D. on what Magneto's been up to, and Cyclops decides that there should be 2 teams of X-Men. One for the Uncanny X-Men book, and one for this one. No, wait, that's the real reason for the split. Never mind. No, he wants two teams of X-Men to get a better beat on the situation. One small team can go check things out, and that group is going to be Cyclops, Beast, Psylocke, Gambit, Rogue, and Wolverine. Rogue, by the way, is a little antsy. After all, she and Magneto were kind of close. The team decides that even though Eric was once their ally, the X-Men must confront him due to the threat he poses by having his house basically hovering over the planet. Speaking of Asteroid M, Magneto, oh my god. Eric must feel pretty comfortable walking around with his robe open, exposing his Sean Connery-esque chest. It turns out that the astronauts and the mutants he rescued were fighting, and Eric tries to break it up. After all, they are guests in his house. The lady from earlier runs to him seeking sanctuary, and the human behind her shoots her for her trouble. Smooth. Way to anger your host there, Chief. You just hit Magneto's berserk button. Nice knowing ya. Sure enough, Eric crushes the electronics in the armor, killing the guy, and the other humans try to apologize for the jerk. Magneto ignores it and goes to grieve over the fallen woman. A man named Fabian Cortez pleads with him to react to this action with impunity. Back at Xavier's, the team identifies Magneto's energy signature entering Earth's atmosphere, and the Blue Strike Force is sent to battle the Master of Magnetism. They got a neat new jet and are rushing headlong into danger. I wonder how long before that rig explodes. In the mid-Atlantic, Magneto muses that once he tried to eliminate the threat of nuclear annihilation by sinking a Russian nuclear sub. Everyone challenged him, and now here he is, rising the sub again, and finding its cache of nuclear weapons still active. Uh-oh. Speaking of uh-ohs, better turn around, Eric. Magneto turns and finds Rogue, who is still quite upset that he never calls her. Lady, do you know how many girlfriends he's had? I lost count. I'm sure he has too. Wolverine wonders why he's raising the sub. He says he sunk the Leningrad as an act of self-defense. Now he will resurrect it for the same reason. They talk more as the X-Men's Blackbird jet sneaks behind him. Of course, Eric sees the plane and holds it in place, preventing Cyclops from going anywhere. Cyclops asks Beast for any bright ideas, and he only has one. Jump out of the plane with Gambit on his back. Yeah, that'll work. At least the plane is free now. Too bad the Master of Magnetism isn't impressed, as Trunk is hurled at the two. However, he is distracted by Psylocke, who gives him a nice kick in the head. He backs up, wondering if they all went mad, as he meant no harm. In mid-sentence, Wolverine claws him. That's not gonna come back and bite you later, Wolvie. Cyclops recognizes Wolverine as being in a berserker rage, so he zaps Magneto into the sub, where he finds the bones of the crew, and shouts to the X-Men that the team only sees him for how he was, not how he is. What a crybaby. Uh-oh, I spoke too soon. He's making off with the nukes, and Rogue rushes to do what they should have done at the beginning. Talk to the man. She takes off, and the others follow suit in the Blackbird. Rogue reaches Eric and tries to explain that Scott may have acted a bit rash earlier. You think? Then again, flying off with a bunch of nukes does kind of send the wrong message. Rogue says that the world knows him as a terrorist. By the way he's acting, he's proving everyone right. He said he tried his best to follow Charles' dream when he taught the New Mutants. He paid for that foolish endeavor with the blood of innocence. As the two talk, a jet fires at Rogue. Magneto uses the incident to say that this proves that humans and mutants can never work together in peace. He sets off one of the nukes and makes a break for it. Temper tantrum much? Back on Asteroid M, Magneto tends to his wounds and wonders why Wolverine attacked him. What changed? Fabian then explains that perhaps the X-Men just don't see themselves in the new world he wants to make. He then offers to heal his wounds. Dude, you're just pouring salt into the open wound, aren't you? Who's the real villain here? Also, you're a bit grabby, aren't you? On the Blackbird, the team tries to search for Rogue when Charles telepathically contacts Scott to tell him that she has landed in the island nation of Genosha, a place where the team recently liberated from a bunch of mutant haters. Our Southern Belle awakens and finds that the local armed forces cannot seem to hold back a group of superpowered terrorists and that they need her help. It's funny, not too long ago they hated mutants here. Now they need her help. Huh. Okay, I'm turning the page now. Wow, the baddies blew up the hospital room Rogue was just in. That can't be a good sign. What do they want? Seems she has the same question, and it turns out that Magneto's new friends want her by their side, or at their feet. Take one guess what the answer is. It's a resounding no as the guy gets knocked off his feet. The big guy says she'll pay the price for that choice. He grabs her, and Rogue says she can't absorb his powers since he's wearing gloves. If she doesn't act fast, she's toast. Things look bleak for Rogue as her teammates arrive just in time. If you could, please turn on the X-Men The Animated Series theme right now, because this is gonna get awesome. Nice optic blast by Cyclops, by the way. The terrorists call the X-Men traitors since they now defend Genosha when they enslaved mutant kind a short time ago. Gambit, being the eloquent statesman, said that the policies have changed. The group of baddies charge at the X-Men saying that they stand for a cause that gives mutant kind a chance to survive. They are the next stage of evolution and blah blah blah. Beast has had enough of their yapping and throws Wolverine at the guy. See kids, this is what is called a fastball special. You know, I've always wondered how the fastball special is supposed to work when there's like a lot of word bubbles around. Anyway, Wolverine takes out the baddie, Psylocke takes out the flyer, and then Wolverine goes straight for the leader, Baby and Cortez. Cyclops says that they need him alive, but Wolverine again is in no mood to negotiate. Dude needs to mellow out. Maybe he needs to become an Avenger or a professor or something, I don't know. Before anything could happen, a holographic image of Magneto appears and says that the incident occurred without his permission. The Acolytes pledged themselves to serve Magneto. He won't leave them, and only the troops were harmed. The actions the Acolytes took was only retribution for the horror inflicted during the Extinction Agenda storyline. All his life, Eric has seen much bloodshed. He cannot change the world, but he can ensure that his people will never again be made to suffer. When all is said and done, Magneto declares Asteroid M to be a sovereign world and a new home for mutant kind. All mutants, including the Professor, are welcome there. He sends the message to all. If they are mutants, the invitation to join him is open. Wolverine figures that this puts him above the law, and Eric replies that those were out-of-date human laws. A new generation of mutants has been born, and with it must come a new world order. Back at Xavier's, Sean Cassidy, better known as Banshee, checks in on Moira McTaggart, the team's other resident royal smart person. Sean finds Moira crying and says that she can't seem to stop. She heard what Magneto said, and says that everything that set Eric onto this path was her fault. And that is where this comic ends. Relax, lady, it's only a cliffhanger. Let's take a closer look at X-Men #1 to see if it deserves all the hype. And did it? The short answer is yes. Yes, it did. Let me explain why, just in case people think I'm all about the Liefeld-esque art, which, frankly, isn't that bad. Sure, the proportions are kind of wonky on some of the characters, and of course some of the eyes are missing some of their pupils. It isn't as distracting as one might think. This might be my nostalgia goggles talking, but when I first read the story back in the day, I was more captivated by the story than the art itself. Yes, the art plays a huge part of the storytelling. After all, you want to show, not tell. Once you get past Lee's art, you get to read a decent story, and I think Claremont and Lee did a good job. Look at it this way, the X-Men are once again whole. They had been split for years and years due to the Merry Mutants being in several books in the 80s. The team is united, and now they face the same threat they fought way back in 1963's X-Men #1. In a way, the team had gone full circle, and this time there were more seasoned superheroes and less teenagers Chuck sent into battle against his former best friend. What better way is there to introduce new readers like me at the time to the world of the X-Men, and entice the old guard with Claremont's classic storytelling? That is part of the reason why the book was successful. Speaking of Magneto, Claremont had been building a pathos for the character since he had been writing him throughout the 80s. I like to think of this as a climax to Magneto's story during Claremont's run. Eric is annoyed with how humanity has treated mutant kind. He moves away to an asteroid to get away from the problems plaguing his people. Sadly, they resurface when mutants want his help, and humans encroach on what he believes is his own sovereign nation. That is Eric's motivation here. It isn't true villainy for villainy sake, as you can see why he'd be angry. Magneto's plight and how the X-Men respond to it make this a good story. Here, Claremont proves that both Charles and Magneto are two sides of the same coin, as if there was any doubt. Sadly, the team of Claremont and Lee didn't last long. After the third issue of X-Men, Claremont was removed as head writer for the X-Men, and thus ended his uninterrupted 17-year run on the comic he helped to define. Lee then became full writer for the book, and John Byrne returned to writing the book too. Even that didn't last long, as Fabian Nicieza, who was writing the New Warriors at the time, stepped in. Lee left Marvel altogether in the series' 11th issue to help form Image Comics, and the rest, as they say, is history. Don't worry, the story isn't all tears. X-Men #1 showed us what could have been for the series had Claremont stayed. He did return to the mutants eventually, though. The comic also proved to be energetic, it showcased each mutant hero without bogging the story down, and became the inspiration for one of the best cartoons of the 90s, X-Men the Animated Series. Not to mention a couple awesome Genesis games. Now that is the legacy. Sure, it had multiple covers and helped to start the speculator boom of the 90s. You cannot deny that X-Men #1 got many people, including myself, into comics. The comic single-handedly showed what the X-Men were all about. We were gradually introduced to their world. And my friends, this is how you restart a series that has been around for years and years, as hints of the backstory were peppered throughout the story. Once that was taken care of, we were pushed toward the future, where the X-Men became a household name, and one of Marvel's hottest properties of the 90s. Fanboyness aside, I really enjoyed this comic, like you couldn't tell. X-Men #1 is just one of those comics that really stuck with me as a kid, and I enjoyed rereading it because it shows the history of the team as they went forward into the future. Check out X-Men #1 in any trade paperback or back issue bin, and you might see what I mean. Until next time, Hang on, I'm getting another message from the future. Yes! According to Brian, I did it. I preserved the future, and I can return to the 21st century. 2005, to be exact. See you guys then.